principals of the first panel assembling in front of the House Financial Services Committee. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernake, and the head of the FDIC, Sheila Bair, talking to Representative Carolyn Maloney of New York. Barney Frank is walking in, and the meeting is set to begin.
Hearing will come to order. No, we'll need the photographers to stop obstructing. I'm a great believer in the freedom of information, but I think America is fully informed as to what these two gentlemen look like, so I don't feel like I'm interfering with First Amendment rights if I ask you to let us get on with the hearing. This hearing is called to do oversight on one of the most important pieces of legislation this current Congress has adopted, and one of the most important in many ways, I think, that any Congress has ever adopted. We were asked last September by the Secretary of the Treasury, supported by the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, to pass a very extraordinary piece of legislation, putting potentially at risk, although we hope in the end not, $700 billion of public money for purposes that go beyond what government has ordinarily done and what almost everybody, including, I believe, the two gentlemen at the table, think government should do. But it was a necessary response to a crisis. Some questions have arisen about decisions that have been made with regard to the expenditure of those funds. We certainly want to hear from the Secretary and the Chairman their assessment of what's happened so far. And let me say at the outset, we do have a problem with all of us that there tends to be a focus on those areas of disagreement. And so accomplishments, areas of agreement, things which worked well, tend not to get a lot of discussion. It is important, so that we can understand what's happened, evaluate what we did, that there be a full discussion today, both of the successes of this program, and I believe there have been significant successes, and also of the concerns many of us have. There were two that I hope we can address, and we've talked about these in a variety of ways, publicly, privately, with these two officials. One, there is concern that the banks which were the recipient of capital infusions under the Capital Purchase Program have not used the funding entirely for relending, which many people here understood would be the purpose. There is both unhappiness at what would appear to be, on the part of some financial institutions, excesses in use of the money, although AIG attracted the most attention there, and that was initially not out of the $700 billion program. But even more substantively, there is concern that, when we hear this anecdotally from people we represent, that credit is still tighter than it ought to be, and that the banks which receive the money have not yet begun to lend it out. The second major concern is over foreclosure prevention, and here I believe there's a very fundamental disagreement on the part of a lot of members with a decision recently made, but we understand that decisions are subject to re-examination, etc. When the program was passed, very explicit language was included to provide for mortgage foreclosure diminution as one of the purposes. There's very specific language in there, and the question was, well, investment versus spending, but the bill itself specifically says that we should, as we buy up mortgage assets, reduce the amount that has to be paid to a reasonable level to avoid foreclosure. So no one can argue that it was not contemplated. Indeed, it was a very important part of, frankly, the effort to get votes for this bill, that we would do mortgage foreclosure reduction. The Secretary's recent announcement was that none of these funds would go towards mortgage foreclosure reduction, although there are other programs on which we are working to do that. And I welcome recent evidence by several of the largest banks, all of whom were recipients of the capital fund, and there's no direct connection, but it is true. Several of the largest banks have now begun to get active. We also got an announcement by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac of movement, although we have some concerns about how far they go and why they lag the programs that the FDIC has put in. But the fundamental policy issue is our disappointment that funds are not being used out of the $700 billion to supplement mortgage foreclosure reduction. It is unfortunately not the case that all of our other efforts have been fully successful. I was a strong proponent of our Hope for Homeowners bill. I now believe if we were redoing that, we'd do it differently in some ways. We learned from experience. There, I believe, is an overwhelmingly powerful set of reasons why some of the TARP money must be used for mortgage foreclosure. First of all, mortgage foreclosures continue at an excessive pace from the standpoint of the economy. The negative effect of this cascade of foreclosures goes far beyond the individuals who lose their homes. It has to do with neighborhood deterioration. It has to do with municipal inability to make their governments work. And it impacts, obviously, the macroeconomy. Secondly, there's a matter of public confidence. A number of things need to be done to get us out of this recession, in my judgment. Fiscal stimulus, increased lending, which I talked to at first, but foreclosure reduction. And it may well be that further action has to be taken. I have to say at this point that public confidence in what we have done so far is lower than anybody would have wanted to be, to the point where it could be an obstacle to further steps. So, because I want to keep strictly to the time for everybody, I will just reiterate, it is essential that we do something to use some of the TARP funds for the diminution of the rate of mortgage foreclosures. And the chair of the FDIC, whom we have invited, has been very much in the lead on this. No one here is endorsing any specific plan, but the need to use TARP funds as the bill contemplates to reduce foreclosures is paramount. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing, and I welcome Secretary Paulson and Chairman Bernake and Chairman Baer, and I appreciate your service to the country. There have been some reports in the press recently that the use of the TARP funds for direct injection of capital into the financial institutions is somehow contrary to the intent of Congress. I actually think that is not correct. The legislation that we passed specifically authorized direct injection of capital into the financial institutions through the purchase of equity or shares. As I think the panel realizes, there was a debate during the entire legislative process and exactly how the situation would be addressed. And the final legislation that passed authorized both the purchase of distressed assets and capital injections. And I think what happened, I think we would all hopefully agree on this, is we simply found that it was quicker, simpler, and I think safer for the taxpayers to purchase shares of stock. I've always had objections or at least reservations about the government purchasing what's been called troubled or toxic assets and having to manage them. So I, for one, Secretary Paulson, applaud you for, and I think most economists applaud you for actually taking, being flexible and taking an approach which was clearly authorized by the legislation. As the chairman said, confidence is critically important to the financial markets and to the overall economy. And it is in the best interest of not only the economy but also of the public that as we shift and improvise on occasions, that we clearly communicate the objective and the basis for what we're doing. I think we all agree on that. Conditions on the ground change, and you must be agile and adjust. And I hope we all understand that. I have a particular concern, and that's that we don't appear to have an exit strategy. We continue to purchase assets, bring them onto the books of the government,